Hi everyone, hope you're all doing well. Happy Vasak. And I was asked by Upasaka Steve Lin to do a little video about the topic Samadhi and the seven factors of enlightenment. And so I did. And I wrote an article, and to be honest, wrote way too much. And so I might have to skim through a little bit of it, but nonetheless, I'm going to read it for you and hopefully you can gain some insight into your own practice. So here we go. Oh yeah, and my name is Manu, and my channel is Humble Stature. So if you're interested about what I talk about, please check me out. So, start off. I'm honored to have been asked by the Daily Dhamma Study Group, Buddhist Pali Canon, English and Other Languages group on Facebook to talk about Samadhi for their 3-week-long Vasak this May, or Vasak celebration. I want to start off by addressing a critical point in understanding the 7 factors of enlightenment by asking what the word enlightenment really means. Sometimes the word awakening is also used instead of enlightenment, but it should be understood as more or less the same thing in this context. I believe that the 7 factors of enlightenment, mindfulness, investigation, energy, joy, tranquility, samadhi, and equanimity, should be viewed as 7 states that ultimately allow you to transcend states altogether, since enlightenment is beyond any state. In Theravada Buddhism, enlightenment is more defined by what it is not than what it is. The standard definition is an enlightened being is one who is free from the defilements, greed, hatred, and delusion. While this definition does suffice in perhaps trying to give some form to what the ultimate goal could be, I really want to emphasize that to view enlightenment itself as a state is a mistake. The other mistake that can be easily made here is that since these 7 factors are scalable, meaning that they can be experienced to various degrees, it might be thought that enlightenment is also scalable. However, enlightenment is a placeholder for something which is beyond description and beyond words. This also applies to the idea of nibbana, which is seen as the blowing out of a candle. It is also of note that both enlightenment and nibbana are synonymous and also used almost interchangeably in Theravada Buddhism. With that said, I would like to ask, what is the point of developing different states if enlightenment itself is not a state? The answer is the state arises not because you develop a state, but because you are purifying the mind through the tools laid out in Buddhism. To the degree which these 7 factors reflect purification of the defilements of the mind, to that degree we are talking about true samadhi, true mindfulness, and true joy. All these qualities are to be understood not just in the mundane way where we think good thoughts or we are happy to this or that external pleasure, but only to the extent that they have arisen due to the purification of a defilement. It is also for this reason that purifying certain defilements while others remain will account for different degrees of these 7 factors arising within our own experience. In addition, the 7 factors of enlightenment are deeply connected and should be understood as impossible to fully develop individually, meaning that to master one of them is to master all of them. You should view this in much the same way that the Buddha says that to fully understand either the Full Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path or dependent origination or the great elements or the 7 factors of enlightenment is to understand them all fully. Therefore, in approaching the discussion of all these 7 factors, we must maintain great humility, because these words and concepts are really here to point us to a point beyond the intellectual understanding of them. I just realized I'm missing a sentence, so I had to refresh. Samadhi is by far the most all-encompassing of the 7 factors and is mentioned in Buddhism in the following ways. The 7 factors of enlightenment obviously includes the word samadhi, which traditionally would be seen as concentration. However, as this article goes on, you'll see that I attempt to make the case that it reflects something closer to a state of higher consciousness. Samadhi is also seen as, number two, Samadhi is also seen as a reinforcement of Bojjhanga, the seven factors of enlightenment, which is interesting because it's in the factors, but then it's also seen as a reinforcing of all seven. So keep that in mind. The last of the Eightfold Path, which is usually also translated as right concentration in English, is actually right Samadhi. Samadhi is also talked about as the peak of the Eightfold Path. In the Majjhima Nikaya 117, I won't even attempt to say it in Pali, the Great 40, as it is in English, the Buddha tells us, now what, monks, is right noble Samadhi with its supports and requisite conditions. Any singleness of mind equipped with these seven factors, right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and right mindfulness, is called noble right Samadhi with its supports and requisite conditions. So number 5, Samadhi is also talked about as one of the threefold division of the Eightfold Path, known as Shila, Samadhi, and Panya. Samadhi is also talked about as being synonymous with the jhanas. Samadhi is sometimes defined as one-pointedness of mind. Samadhi is sometimes defined as collecting or bringing together. Samadhi is sometimes defined as a meditative absorption or union. In early Buddhism, Samadhi was seen as the goal, which later on, prajna, even though I think, or just even vipassana, I guess would be more the system that you're working than the final thing. Anyway, insight started to take greater importance. Samadhi is often talked about as being synonymous with samatha, usually defined as a calm abiding. In addition, I think it's worth noting that you also have the Hindu influence when trying to discover the meaning of samadhi. In the case of the Hindu tradition, or more specifically Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, you also have the following definitions. Move the camera up a little bit. Number 1, samadhi is the complete absorption in the divine or union. Samadhi is the final goal. Also, in Hinduism would be equal to enlightenment, which I'm not saying that's what Buddhism believes. I'm just kind of pointing this out as a way to maybe get some more information to reflect on. Samadhi, number 3, leads to sanyama, the ability to direct or perceive truth. Sanyama arises through the practice of concentration, dharana, meditation, dhyana, and union samadhi. And so I'm not kind of comparing and saying that that's the same as Buddhism. It's more to bring these things to an experiential level, because a lot of what I've learned in my own practice has been from, understanding Hinduism, Theosophy, Buddhism, a number of Mahayana traditions. And so whenever I think it's relevant, which I think it's relevant here, I try to incorporate it. And so as we continue, now, if all this seems quite confusing, it's because it is. The word samadhi seems to be a general term of practice, a categorization, and used in trying to define other terms. One example of how of this is how in the three divisions, the samadhi aspect is seen as including right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi. So samadhi is part of samadhi. And then on top of that, samadhi is also seen as being the peak of the Eightfold Path. So, obviously it's not a very easy concept to define, but since it's so all-encompassing, I really do think that a higher state of consciousness makes more sense than, say, just being concentrated. So, let's continue. As someone who follows the early Theravada Buddhist view, I really see the jhanas as being the primary focal point. In trying to discover the truth about samadhi, in the Majjhima Nikaya 141, the analysis of the truths, we see the following. And what is right samadhi? Here, in the case where a monk, quite withdrawn from sensuality, withdrawn from unskillful mental qualities, enters and remains in the first jhana, rapture and pleasure born from withdrawal, accompanied by direct thought and evaluation. With the stilling of direct thoughts and evaluations, he enters and remains in the second jhana, rapture and pleasure born of composure, unification of awareness free from directed thought and evaluation, internal assurance. From the fading of rapture, he remains equanimous, mindful, and alert, and sense pleasures with the body. He enters and remains in the third jhana, of which the noble ones declare equanimous and mindful. He has a pleasant abiding. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, as with the early disappearance of elation and distress, he enters and remains in the fourth jhana, purity of equanimity and mindfulness, neither pleasure nor pain. This is called right concentration, even though here it'd be right samadhi, because that's what we're talking about, and that's what that word translates to in Pali. Then, in the Majjhima Nikaya 36, chapter 36, the longer discourse on Sakya, I think I said that right, maybe not. The Buddha talks about how after reaching the fourth jhana, he experienced the following. When the mind was thus concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of defilement, splendid, malleable, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I directed it to the knowledge of recollecting past lives. I recollected my manifold past lives, i.e. 1 birth, 2, 5, 10, 50, 100, 1,000, 100,000, many eons of cosmic contraction, many eons of cosmic expansion, many eons of cosmic contraction and expansion. There I had such a name belonging to such a clan, had such an appearance, such was my food, such my experience of pain and pleasure, such the end of my life. Passing away from that state, I arose here. There, too, I had such a name, belonged to such a clan, had such an appearance. Such was my food, such was my experience of pleasure and pain, such the end of my life. Passing away from that state, I arose here. Thus I remembered my manifold past lives in their modes and details. This was the first knowledge I attained in the first watch of the night. Ignorance was destroyed, knowledge arose, darkness was destroyed, light arose, as it happens in one who is heedful, ardent, resolute. But the pleasant feeling that arose in this way did not invade my mind or remain. When the mind was thus concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of defilement, palliant, malleable, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I directed the knowledge of the passing away and reappearance of beings. I saw, by means of the divine eye, purified and surpassing the human, which is important here. So he talks about the divine eye, right? So he reaches the fourth jhana, and then we're talking about the divine eye, and being able to perceive all these different things. He sees beings passing away and reappearing, and I discern how they are inferior and superior, so we can judge them accordingly, beautiful and ugly, fortunate and unfortunate, in accordance with their karma, or kama. These things, who were endowed with bad conduct of body, speech, and mind, who reviled the noble ones, held wrong views, and took actions under the influence of their wrong views, with all the breakup of the body after death, have reappeared in the plane of deprivation, the bad destination, the lower realms, and hell. But these beings who were endowed with good conduct of body, speech, and mind, did not revile the noble ones who held right view and took actions under the influence of right views, with the breakup of the body after death, having reappeared in the good destinations in the heavenly world. Thus, by means of divine eye, purified and surpassing the human, I saw beings passing away and reappearing, and I discerned how they are inferior and superior, beautiful and ugly, fortunate and unfortunate, in accordance with their karma. This was the second knowledge I attained in the second watch of the night. Ignorance was destroyed, knowledge arose, darkness was destroyed, light arose, as happens to one who is heedful, ardent, and resolute. But the pleasant feeling that arose in this way did not invade my mind and remain. When the mind thus concentrated and purified, unblemished, okay, we're kind of repeating here, I directed the knowledge of mental fermentations. I discerned, as it was actually present, that this is stress. This is the origin of stress. This is sensation of stress. I guess for this one, instead of suffering, because now they're going into the Four Noble Truths. And yeah, these are the fermentations. This is the origin of the fermentations. So anyway, he realizes also the Four Noble Truths, and that was the third knowledge, because this is kind of getting a little bit long. So now that we have some perspective on the 7 factors of enlightenment, discussed the different definitions of samadhi, and heard what the Buddha has to make of all this, I would like to make a couple of final points that will hopefully wrap this topic up and allow you to take away something useful for your own practice. It is my belief, since I fully recognize that I and everyone else does not speak for the Buddha, that the Buddha clearly saw the following. Number 1, that samadhi is critical to enlightenment. That samadhi itself denotes a state of consciousness, which is why it can be used in reference to the 7 factors of enlightenment. Jhanas, the Eightfold Path, a division within the Eightfold Path, and a goal, even though in Buddhism it is not the ultimate goal. The proof of this is mostly that its development is dependent on the other 7 parts of the Eightfold Path needing to be developed. So, I really think that the expansion of consciousness and being able to seek truth is pretty much the highest principle you can kind of point to as a human being. It's kind of like the subtlest factor. And even in like a lot of other traditions, obviously, people maybe identify themselves as consciousness, and I don't think we are consciousness. I think we're something beyond that. We're beyond state, whatever that, and it's beyond we, beyond I. It's really hard to define, but I think that this seems to be kind of the subtlest factor, and for that reason, associating it with consciousness just makes a lot of sense to me. And so, the third, these higher states of consciousness allow for higher knowledge through direct perception, which in the Hindu system is called samyama. I used to say it as an N, like sanyama, but I might be mispronouncing it. It might be samyama. I haven't found a Pali word for this, even though there may very well be one. However, I do believe that using a comparative religious approach does strengthen the argument rather than diminish it. And I will add too that, he talks about the divine eye, so I guess you could see it as equivalent to the divine eye, that in the 4th jhana, the divine eye starts to develop. But I haven't really seen, it seems kind of like very all or nothing in Theravada Buddhism, which I think is a mistake. And I'll kind of get into my own thoughts now about that. So to say this another way, you must develop a deep state of samadhi in order to investigate Dhamma, or the nature of reality itself. This investigative property in relation to samadhi is ultimately aimed at vipassana, since the idea here is that the combination of these 2 factors will lead to insight. I believe that in order to obtain enlightenment, you must reach the 4th jhana, which is denoted as being a place where the mind is concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfection, malleable, wielding, steady, and attain to imperturbability. And that from there, you can investigate reality directly, which I'm defining here as sanyama. I'd also like to note here that this 4th jhana wouldn't be just having a clear mind and the everyday understanding of these words, or rather something super mundane. And I know that the 4th jhana is still, from a Theravada point of view, not considered to be super mundane, but if you have the divine eye and are seeing your past lives and all this stuff, if that's not super mundane, I don't know what is. I think the whole, division of not seeing the 4th jhana as being super mundane seems kind of strange to me. But I also understand where they're coming from. Hence the knowledge of the Buddha, hence the higher knowledge of the Buddha talks about. Now, samadhi in Buddhism, much like in Hinduism, has levels, and one of the critical levels is called when sanyama is developed. Sanyama is seen as the ability to merge with a specific thing, thereby directly gaining, should be gaining instead of gain, true knowledge of that thing. Sanyama is a scalable phenomenon, and I believe functions very much the same way thought retrieval works. You direct your awareness to a specific topic on a certain, and then certain information is presented to your awareness. Therefore, if someone was about to develop their mind to what is described as the 4th jhana in Buddhism, I believe that with knowledge of samyama, one is able to then direct one's awareness, merge with it, whatever that thing is that they're trying to investigate, and ultimately know the truth of it through direct experience. In conclusion, Samadhi in the seven factors of enlightenment is part of developing one's consciousness so that direct knowledge through the jhanas can be obtained. Thank you for taking the time to hear my views on this. The reason I bring this up isn't to convert anyone from one organized religion to another, but because I believe that through understanding other traditions as well as our own, we also can begin to have a broader understanding. I believe that both Buddhism and Hinduism have become corrupted over time, but by studying and practice it, we can resist dogma and directly experience for ourselves what the Buddha talked about. I believe that most of the books, especially in the West, are written by academics and not by those who have glimpsed what the Buddha himself experienced. May all beings be happy, peaceful, and liberated. So, yeah, that's what I wrote, and I guess I just want to give a couple thoughts about that. So samyama was really a critical thing for me, because a lot of the people that I all know that have psychic abilities, and from what psychic stuff that I've experienced, whether it comes to knowing certain stuff about past lives or being able to see things that, how to say, like everything from mind reading to all the psychic abilities. And even, because a lot of these things you can have even psychic abilities from someone who isn't that developed just because of the, how to say, because subtle doesn't necessarily mean higher. And this is one of the big misunderstandings where you have people with psychic abilities that then claim that they have higher knowledge because it doesn't necessarily correlate. But, kind of like with the Buddha, you can see that certain knowledge of, say, past lives, reality, the truth of dukkha, of suffering, these things are considered to be kind of like higher knowledges. And I think this quality of samyama is kind of usually the missing piece because I think people don't really know how to quiet their mind and then direct it to knowledge that normally, normally would be expected to not know. Because most people, even Buddhists, are still coming out of a very materialistic paradigm. And Buddhist has its own cosmology and its own understanding of subtle realms. And when you understand subtle realms and what's awakening, and that you can then direct this higher awareness to truths, which is usually called this divine eye, it's really a game changer. And it's something that I think is really kind of one of the missing pieces in the modern understanding of Buddhism and Samadhi and how to practice. Because even though I'm using the Hindu term, I think it's also within the Buddhist, doctrine, as I'm kind of pointing out here by quoting the Majjhima Nikaya. And so, yeah, hopefully this was interesting to you. Thank you for watching, and may you be happy, peaceful, and liberated. Happy Vesak.